or because I need to burn the calories in order to eat my Thanksgiving dinner. That's not the why,
Right.
because my watch pinged me that I needed to move.
Right.
That's not the why.
Mm-hmm.
So the why I get up is because I want to feel good. And for me as a parent, it's also because I want to be able to give my kids love for the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm like, mommy needs to work out,
Mm-hmm.
that might not happen.
1, 2, 3.
So in March 2022, my good friend Devin, who's an esthetician, asked our group of friends if we wanted a free facial. She had to train someone. This is an obvious yes. And it was actually perfect timing because my skin, and I've never had skin issues, was the worst I've ever seen it. And I don't just mean on my face. I mean that I had some strange rash on my arms. I had skin flaking. It was just, not my perfect state. Went to this facial, felt rejuvenated, came home. Truly that day noticed that my hair was falling out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, I'm just kind of falling apart here. But good thing we at least got the skin side figured out. And at that point, I actually started taking notes on my phone. I had just finished breastfeeding that October, so it was maybe 4 months after that, and started taking notes of some other things that I noticed. Another thing that I noticed was, and maybe TMI, but I was sweating more often.
Yeah.
I started waking up in the night, and I'm normally like head hits the pillow, I am asleep, and I am asleep until my alarm goes off. And even at this point, I'm sure you feel this too, after years of waking up to coach classes at a certain time, I kind of naturally wake up at that time. So waking up around 1 a.m. to either rustle around or go to the bathroom, whatever it may have been, was abnormal. And that was happening often. I would wake up and feel so bloated, just this sense of indigestion. And I couldn't pinpoint the source of that because I was eating the same.
Yeah, you weren't eating donuts the night
No,
before.
it wasn't like it was definitely that cupcake. Typically, I can handle those. No, but I, again, wrote this down, and I noticed then that there was a change in my menstrual cycle. For my entire life, it had always been on a 28 days, and it was around 24, 25, 26, fluctuating across the board. I made notes of all these things for a few months. I remember kind of in August or September being like, okay, this has gone on for a little bit. There was a time that my face felt really puffy, so I bought an ice roller. There was, I noticed some weight changes or like distribution of weight changes, so I dialed into my macros more diligently,
even more.
obviously. And fatigue started hitting me really hard around 2 p.m. And I remember that I would tell people this, and they'd be like, yes, you have 2 small children. Okay. Yes, but I don't normally feel just completely
This is different.
depleted. I, at that point, realized, number one, the power of taking notes, because I could track back and say, these are kind of the things that are going on. There's skin issues, there's hair falling out, there's digestion issues, there's joint pain. I had some random back pain that I went to the chiropractor for like every month for a number of months and could not pinpoint exactly what was causing it. I had these weight changes, this perspiration, etc. And then finally I decided, okay, I'm going to go to the doctor and let them know. So I went to my PCP, got labs drawn. They said, hey, everything's fine.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. And I said, well, what do we do about like me feeling all these things and it being really abnormal? And they said, why don't you just try to focus on a healthy lifestyle? And I was like, okay. And I didn't say, do you understand what I do? I said, okay, what do you think?
Doc, I'm your wet dream when it comes to a healthy lifestyle.
I'm like, what do you think that is? And she said, well, do you prioritize sleep? Do you get outside? Do you eat fruits and vegetables? Do you, and all of these things. I'm like, yes, I do all of those things. And you would be shocked to see the list of things that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I said to her, hey, I am the healthiest person that you're going to see today, like no doubt in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Yeah.
I ended up going to a functional doctor. And this message is not to say like, hey, go find a functional doctor and really get your labs drawn. This is to say by making sure that you are your advocate.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I love that.
and the beauty of what we do here is we also couple you with a coach who can, if you have these conversations with them and record this kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
they can help you figure out like maybe what the next step should be. So make sure that you understand your body better than anyone else and you are tuned in to what's going on. But all that to say, I went to the functional doctor. I had my labs drawn. We found out that my testosterone was uncomfortably low. My thyroid was not in a good place. My cortisol was really high, which I found pretty shocking. Now that I've investigated more, I kind of understand that. But the cortisol was high. The adrenals needed a lot of support. And my anxiety and my inflammation levels were not good. So I had to step back and think, okay, if I'm doing all of these healthy lifestyle things, what are some other behavior or nutritional changes that I can make to really make sure that my wellness is not going to tank based off these symptoms? And what I discovered, it didn't have a lot of changes to do with my fitness, but we will talk today about how fitness and what people tend to do in that fitness world, in this go culture might affect those levels. But I think that for me, a lot of those changes needed to happen on the behavioral and nutritional side. So I think that it will be impactful for us to talk about how those things may happen, how to see those things happening, what you can do about it in the different realms of your life in order to live a life that is really great systematically and not just really awesome at fitness, but really bad at getting sleep, etc.
Oh, I'm so into it. I'm so happy you're here. I'm so thankful for you. I've known you and Andrew for like 12 years.
Yes.
And I can't think of two people individually and then collectively as a unit that have experienced like a better trajectory towards growth. And, you know, where you and I were individually in our own places of relationships and fitness when we first met, and where we have come really individually but collectively because we work together. I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud of you. I'm so thankful for you. And after the last podcast, we said, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do lots more of these? And as I was saying before we started recording, you know, I grew up with 4 little brothers. For most of my life, I've really intentionally and blatantly tried to be as masculine as I possibly could. And now I'm married and I have 3 wonderful girls. And it's given me permission to investigate and be really curious about the female. And is something from a fitness standpoint that I think deep down I've always had a heart for that, like for the female that's trying so hard to do the right thing. And I think most of the time that's what's heartbreaking is that she's trying to do the right thing. Like whoever it is that steps into the gym, like her intentions are to feel better about herself. And so I asked you the question like, hey, you know, 10, 15 years ago, if you could go back in time, which is one of my favorite questions in general, what would you say to yourself? I asked my wife, Kelly, as well. But then also having these malleable little girls that I live with, I get to see it also from the other side of, hey, what would you, not hypothetically or retroactively, but hey, we have these real people that we have the potential to guide in maybe a different direction than we've experienced. And when I say we, I mean all of us, but maybe females specifically, because I think that has some crossover with what the male experience is, but clearly I can tell from living with 4 of them that it's not exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, one of the things I hope we talk about is just women's health. But also, maybe even just from a fitness standpoint, things that are getting in our way at this point in time. Your hot take on some of those things with your vast amounts of coaching and experience that you say, you know what, at this point, like, this isn't actually serving us as well as it once did. So, we can start really wherever.
So I think it might be helpful before we dive into some of those hot takes on the fitness landscape, because I do think that will be a great topic for us since you said a woman is kind of looking for her place and her purpose and her identity through fitness. She knows that she wants to be healthy, but there's a lot of conflicting information and conflicting feelings and all that. I do think that our advice here also will apply to men. So if you're a male, still listen in, because we have some thoughts. Don't tune out. You can just kind of view it through a different lens. But before we get into some of the things fitness-wise that in the fitness landscape may be affecting women or men on the way that they view training, we can kind of circle back to that story of, hey, when you're in a really stressed time in your life, be that because of having kids, be that because you have a high-stress job, a lot of those other things do need to be dialed in to make sure that we don't go off on the deep end on the other side.
Yeah, and by dialed, you mean like recalibrated, really?
Recalibrated, for sure. And I was telling you this, that I read something the other day that discipline means the commitments that you make to yourself. And so when people will say, you're really disciplined about these things, I'm thinking, well, my commitment is to myself. I want to feel good tomorrow. So I'm going to make sure that I prioritize these things, but not in a way that I've like lost touch with my relationship with my friends or anything, but that I want to feel good. I don't want to wake up feeling bloated first thing in the morning. I don't want to feel that fatigue at 2 p.m. That didn't feel good. So what can I do not to do that?
Yeah, I love that. Say that again. Discipline.
Discipline is the commitments that you make to yourself.
What do you think it means? Why would you make a commitment to yourself?
Man, and that could be in so many different realms of life, right? But if we're speaking just about wellness, if you want to be your best version of yourself, in order to be the best version of yourself for others, so in a mother's or a parent's standpoint, that being the case, that means that I need to recalibrate my brain around what I need in a day or what I need to do for myself in order to like be fully functioning.
Yeah.
And so I view discipline not as like, hey, that's amazing that you wake up at 5 a.m. to go to the 5:30. Yeah, it is. But that discipline to me is I want to make sure that I'm fully present with my kids during the day. So for me, that means that I work out in the morning.
I want to go off on a little tangent here because I think this is really good. Somebody, John Bauer, sent me a like a trailer for some documentary, and it's called, I'm going to look it up. It's called The Cave of Adullam. Okay. Stay with me here. Look it up. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's this guy, I think, in the Detroit area, African-American guy that's a martial artist. And he brings in these inner city youth, And at first glance, it looks like a martial arts program. But what it is a program to give these kids like unconditional love. And I'm watching this 2-minute trailer. And at the end, he says this, which got me really emotional. He said, all of these people in the community think that these kids are here because they need discipline, but what these kids need is love. And he's like, all the scared straight stuff, you scare a kid into, not making the same mistakes. He's like, all that is bogus. He's like, what these kids need is maybe for the first time in their life, like unconditional love. I mean, it's super powerful. I can't wait to see it. But the reason that I mentioned that is I think a commitment to yourself is to say, I love myself. I'm doing these things not because the world tells me I need to exercise or because my stupid ass watch tells me I need these number of steps. I go walk because I love to be outside. I exercise because it feels really good to be in that place when I then have to transition to be a parent, to know that I've already done those things. So what's weird and paradoxical is when we say discipline, really what we're saying is, hey, I'm prioritizing myself. I'm prioritizing that I matter. I'm prioritizing that I'm worthy of love, right?
Yeah. And we say a lot here, what is your why?
Mm-hmm.
And my why is because I deserve that.
Right.
And it does not need to be because I want to wear the matching set of the bra and pants and I want to look really good in my hot yoga class. That's not the why. Or because I need to burn the calories in order to eat my Thanksgiving dinner. That's not the why.
Right.
Because my watch pinged me that I needed to move.
Right.
That's not the why.
Mm-hmm.
So the why I get up is because I want to feel good. And for me as a parent, it's also because I want to be able to give my kids love for the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm like, mommy needs to work out, that might not happen.
Mm-hmm. And you said it yesterday. It's like, as a parent, there's very little, I believe, that they're going to receive from sitting down and getting a lecture on something. But those kids learn quick by the way that you carry yourself. They're very in tune. Hey, Dad, what's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't said a single word. I've been in the house for 90 seconds. Stella comes up and says, hey, Dad, what's wrong? Because she knows, right? She knows how I normally act and that I was different. And the same thing with exercise and the same thing with nutrition and the same thing with, like mom's looking at her watch because she knows she needs to get to work out.
Mm-hmm.
What does that communicate to the kid? It communicates that it's a chore, right? Not like, hey, this is a joy. And I mean, that's a whole nother ball of wax, but
We call that caught, not taught in our house. So the way that we act is going to be caught.
Uh-huh.
It's not just about what we're teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So that means we have to live it and act it and be it. And that's how that's going to start to sprinkle into their lives. So if it's, hey, daddy's going on a run. It's not daddy's going on a run because he has to before, we have our big dinner tonight. No, it's daddy's going to go on a run because he loves being outside and it's so beautiful and it's going to feel so good and he can listen to that book that he loves. Then that's a much different idea from the kids of what going on a run is. And we're training their brains to wire around fitness in that way now.
Yeah. And I think even just as like a family system, my kids, I like to remind them, like, I'm not your butler, like I'm not here to serve you. Like, you're going to get to an age where we all need to be on this journey together towards this generative place where all of us are getting better. So there's times where I'm going to be really keyed into what you need, but spoiler alert, there's going to be times where you need to be keyed into what I need. And that, that, like to a 5-year-old, they're like, what?
Yeah. And we want to teach them how to think, not what to think. And that means that you can't be their butler. Like you've said this, that you say it with your kids of, well, what do you think?
Yeah.
What a great question. Because if mommy gives all of the answers, but anyway, that lessons of the household. Yes.
Yeah.
Caught, not taught, how that kind of dives into the behavior and the fitness side of why we tell them why we're going to sleep,
Yeah.
not just get in your room, it's time to sleep. It's like,
Mhm.
no, you're going to feel so good
Wouldn't
in the
you
morning.
like-
Can you believe it? Yeah.
Wouldn't you like to feel great tomorrow?
Yeah. Mommy also wants to feel great. So,
You said something earlier. It's like, hey, I want to do this because I deserve it. And it's and I think what you were saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth. And Kelly and I talk about this a lot. It's like, hey, let's strip away all the roles that we put on, and all the identities and all the costumes that we wear, our matching set, which I got to explain to the girls, like, hey, Daddy, why is she in a swimsuit at Starbucks? It's like, okay, it's not a swimsuit. It's like, it's a whole thing. But, you strip all
it's
that away.
in right now.
And, the question is like, hey, who are you without any of those things, without being a mom? And what does that look like from a self-worth standpoint? And what I heard you say, and I absolutely believe the answer is, well, you're worthy of love just because you are. There's like nothing you got to do. And that's, we could make that biblical, but I don't think that it has to be. It's like everybody is inherently worth something just because you're breathing. And to like rest in that thought. And then as we start to do these things that we know are good things and are ways to love ourselves, it's just an extension of that. And if we want to go run a race, or if we want to put on a, bike shorts and go for a mountain bike, it doesn't mean, hey, I've all of a sudden become this thing that I need accolades for. It's just something that I did because I know deep down, like, hey, my self-worth isn't like based on you congratulating me on that race.
Yes, the fully known and fully loved aspect of who you are. And I think I read this great book, highly recommend, called Unoffendable. I think it's by
you mentioned
Brant Hansen. I apologize if that's wrong. But how everybody, there's a lot there, but understanding that everybody is worthy of who they are and loved and known, and we're all people. And so I think that as far as the fitness landscape with women, the I deserve it, sometimes women can take that in the wrong way, or men of
it can feel like entitlement.
Totally. Or it can feel guilty.
Self-indulgence.
And I say that in a way of, hey, we're all worth caring about ourselves. And that doesn't take away from me being a good parent. It just might mean that I have to finagle my day a little bit differently than I would if I didn't. So, some of the ways that I adjusted what I was doing.
Yes, I'm fascinated because, without context, someone wouldn't know that, like, from a fitness standpoint, you were dialed. From a nutrition standpoint, you were already weighing and measuring.
Right.
You were already keyed in. As you were telling that story in the beginning, I also wrote down that you had opened your field of vision to include more. So as before, it was like, hey, how could I almost achieve, close to an absolute, close to as good as someone could do in these things, and you started tracking and paying attention to more of the territory versus like the immediate landscape of
like
fitness.
widening the lens.
Yes.
Yes. And I think that, and like I said, we'll dive into how the fitness side might affect some people in that area. For me, I think I was doing the right workouts to not mess up thyroid and testosterone and cortisol and all of that. But I started really prioritizing sleep. I always have, but in the way of, hey, if I don't get this amount of sleep, then that will determine, and we talked about this in the last podcast, that determines the type of workout that I have tomorrow. That in hand kind of changed the social aspect of our lives, that if, and obviously there are exceptions, but Andrew and I prioritize sleep. And so if that socially doesn't fit with something, like, hey, we want to feel awesome tomorrow for our kids. So we're going to say no to certain things. How
do people respond to that?
Not well, as you know. Not well. No, they'll be like, "Are you okay? You're leaving? It's okay." And I'm like, "Yes, that's the rule."
Yeah,
I
but
love you so much, but I deserved it.
it's the same as drinking. It's the same as staying up late. It's the same as all these things. Where it's like, hey, don't you want to feel like shit like I'm going to tomorrow? It's like, well,
Right.
no.
But I also think because I'm so in tune with my body, as are you, I know how that feels. So the next day, I know what it feels like to be low on sleep or have had alcohol. I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that people like fully sit in that moment of why do I feel this way or what's making me feel that way.
I think you're right. I think there's a lack of perception. I think there's a lack of awareness of just like paying attention
Write
to
it
those
down.
things. Yeah.
Hey, if you felt that way, what is it that you've also had in your diet this week that maybe made you wake up?
Mm-hmm.
Other things were not having coffee first thing in the morning, or at least not before food or water with high cortisol. I was trying to make sure that I had food and water in me and that I ate and drank something like 20 or 30 ounces of water, within an hour of waking, so that I didn't have a blood sugar spike. So notice the things we've talked about, mostly behavioral or nutrition. I was making sure that I got sunlight on my eyes in the morning, that my circadian rhythm was operating correctly, making sure, and we could go into that circadian rhythm and cortisol and leptin and melatonin and all of that, but really just to make sure that my system was functioning in the timing that it was supposed to. Focusing on meals, always having protein, carb, and fat, and produce. I've even taught my kids those things.
Yeah.
So, so we have a plate, and I'm like, okay, where's the protein? Where's the fat? Where's the carb? Where's the color? Where's the produce? And it's so fun to have them build a plate that way. So healthy habits caught, not taught. But that one's taught, but now it's kind of like they look at it and know.
How did you teach them what a protein was?
That was a little bit, sometimes they get a little bit confused if things are kind of mixed, that they're both. And I'm like, well, it's technically a fat, but it's also, but yeah, we did chicken and meat. We've talked about eggs, but then we've talked about how eggs has some fat in it.
You know what I tell the girls? I said if it once had a soul or a face.
Oh, there you go. Probably should have said that. Yeah, I should just be like, a tiger is also
that
protein.
kind of grossed them out, though. They're like, what?
So making sure that my meals were balanced, making sure my carb count was high enough. I was always really good about protein.
That's a counterintuitive thing.
Absolutely. I would say especially for women, that protein, I was already doing 1.0 times body weight. It's so funny in the world right now on the internet, it says like 0.3 times body weight is fine too.
Huh?
I'm really confused there, but a lot of
a big range.
It's a really big range, but a lot of people will say 0.8 to 1.0.
Yeah.
But I was nailing the protein aspect, but I wasn't nailing the carb aspect, which means I wasn't having the energy stores ready to pull from and wasn't fueling before and after workouts correctly, but kind of just operating on E, if you will. I think that I started doing more parasympathetic nervous system work.
I think that's, as I am a happy observer, I think that's what you become really good in. Whereas before, it's like you could say, hey, I specialized in sympathetic nervous system.
And how to get you there.
Yeah, and now it's, like we do a daily call, and I love to hear what things you're doing under that health category, not to produce stress, but almost to
mitigate.
Yes.
We do a daily call as coaches that we talk about. We want every coach to say, and it lasts 5 minutes. But I'm telling this story because people could do this in their homes with their significant other or their friends, because it keeps you very accountable. But we list something that we've done for our health, or something that we plan to do for our health that day, because we do the call in the morning. We list something that we're doing for work, because we are on a work call. And then we list something that we're doing for a relationship. It's always funny if you don't have something for a relationship, and people will be like, I am going to call my mom today. Hey, then you better call your mom today.
Or it's like 3 days in a row. It's like,
I still need to call my mom.
How's that mom call going?
So the health, and you said this, the health does not need to be, when you list it, just about a workout.
boring.
It could be what you are doing for your brain, for yourself, for just movement. And to that point, and this week is a great example, it's been a really busy week for me. And that has meant that my workouts are not going to empty my stress, or, add into my stress bucket if I'm already there. So my health answer is I went on a walk this morning, or I rode on the bike this morning, or I read my Bible this morning, or I listened to a podcast this morning. What did you do that was good for you as a human?
Mm-hmm.
And old me would have been like, I went to the 5:30 a.m. class and I posted my workout on Sugar WOD, and I won. So that would not.
And totally. It's like 10
Yeah.
years ago, it'd be like, you read a book for your health.
Yeah,
What are
you
you
read a
talking about?
Totally. And so we want to reframe that brain. That's why we have behavior as the beginning of our name, behavior and performance research. It's not just about your performance, but parasympathetic nervous system work, that would be your rest and digest. Sympathetic would be your fight or flight. Typically, if you are sweating more, even think about when you're nervous. That's your sympathetic nervous system kicking in because you're sweating a little bit more.
Yeah, you tell me that when I sweat and I eat that it's not restful. Clue number one.
Great point, though. If you're eating standing up and eating really fast, you haven't gotten into the right state to actually digest.
If it's so spicy that I feel stressed out, you tell me it's not doing what's supposed to be done?
Sympathetic would be heart rate being raised, yes, and more sweat.
Yeah.
And so if you think about a workout, if you are adding in breath work, so at the beginning of the workout, there's more inhales. At the end of the workout, there's more exhales, and there's more of that feeling of being safe and the workout is over and I'm doing some kind of cool down. And I even do this breath work. Oh, well, so that could be like you do yoga or Pilates depending on the type. If it's truly like a restorative yoga or a restorative type of workout. But I would say even incorporating that breath work for me as someone who had high inflammation and high cortisol, this morning is a great example. My husband's out of town, so I had to get the kids ready and myself ready and everybody out the door. And I was getting my stuff together, and I thought, I need to take some very big breaths while I'm doing this.
Wow.
I just need to, okay, I'm going to pour my water. And working through it in that way,
Just
even
the awareness
longer breaths.
that you need that, I think is a great takeaway.
Huge. So if you are constantly working in a sympathetic nervous system state, that can lead to a lot of stress hormones being pulled from. That can lead to the higher cortisol, which we'll get into in a little bit. But that was why I started incorporating, hey, I'm breathing, I'm okay. What do I need to, when the kids have gone down for bed, I should probably read something rather than getting amped up about something. What is it that I'm doing during my idle time that is more focused and calm to tell my system, hey, we're going to go to bed and we're not going to talk about anything crazy or do anything crazy before that. I think one of the biggest things that I worked on was retraining my brain for what an effective workout is.
Yes, let's talk about this.
And I, like I said, I think I was there, but I think sometimes my mental went back to the other side of things that I used to think that sweatiness was an indicator of the effectiveness of my workout. That more fatigue, more soreness, more sweat meant that the workout, more calories burned, was the more effective workout for my body and what I needed to do. And in the past, or even during this time when things were going on, I had moved away from that because I believe in some different things that we'll talk about. However, I still might say, I'm going to throw this on at the end of the day, or not look at the anxiety level that I was already feeling when my kids were little and I was running on less sleep, and I would still pile on something that was sweaty and was exhausting.
Yes.
And there's this, and I think I asked you yesterday, I think the term is neuroplasticity of rewiring or retraining or formulating your brain to believe about something differently, that I had to literally, and that's the hardest thing to do, retrain my brain for how it thinks a workout should feel and be.
Yeah. Then I have a good analogy for that. I mean, so those physiological responses are real, and from a sensational standpoint, so literally like your senses perceiving, is that stressful? It absolutely is. There's no doubt about that. But let's use something different. Let's use nutrition. The nutritional equivalent of that would be to have something that is also sensational, which means that the food that you would consume would not produce a parasympathetic response. It would produce something that was intoxicatingly appealing. And so for that meal, if I wanted to do the same thing that you just mentioned, from an exercise standpoint, it wouldn't be good for you. Now, in that moment, it would be great, just like the workout feels like it's great, but it's not a way to live your life long term. And I think that's the really hard thing to communicate. It's like, hey, if we go into any group fitness class, the easiest thing for you and I to do would be to coach a workout that would be absolutely devastating. It's the easiest thing for you and I to do.
Totally.
Just like it would be the easiest thing for us to get something nutritionally that would hit all those things. Or from a relational standpoint, that's what a one-night stand is.
Yep.
Right? I mean,
a cake,
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is so good.
Yeah.
But tomorrow it's not great.
Tomorrow it's not great. And I think the thing that you and I agree with, it doesn't mean those things are bad. It doesn't mean that having cake is evil. And it doesn't mean that we're not advocating that exercise can't be hard. But I think by and large, where fitness needs to trend is to live in a world where you're not searching for those stimulations.
Yeah, or that adrenaline or that kick or that hit. That makes me think a neighbor asked me for meal ideas. And I said, Andrew and I typically eat for sustenance to just like check the boxes.
Yeah, it's boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can
80%
send
of the time.
you what I'm doing. But yes, I'll follow a recipe sometimes, but we typically are making foods that we choose the meat and we choose the veggie and we choose the starch and we kind of go from there. Add whatever spice you want that changes it up. And that makes me think that with fitness, it's kind of the same way, that it's like, hey, we're working out in a way for opposite of sustenance, but that works
most of the
just
time.
to feel good.
Yeah.
Just to move my body, move my blood. And the way working out that way allows my body to recover and to function correctly. And that's not the super sexy variation. But guess what? I have not had an injury in a really long time.
Yeah.
A really long time.
Yeah. And it also, I asked my wife in anticipation for this, like, what do you think? She's like, hey, burnout's totally preventable. Getting to a point where you have to, because you're injured or you got to like take a vacation from your life, like it's totally preventable. And it is this thing that we're talking about. It's like relying for the most part on pretty boring practices that you can still find enjoyment in. I think that's the secret of a well-blended life. It's like, hey, going for a walk can be really enjoyable.
Can be the best.
Slow resistance training, zone 2 work. And it almost makes those times where you wake up and it's like, I've slept great. I could really go for it today. It like gives you permission to enjoy it. The same way that on Saturday, it's a celebration for us to have a Queen Amman from Village Bakery. But it wouldn't be if we were having that like 6 days a week.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yes. It would be really hard to overdo zone 2 work, low to moderate intensity,
Amen.
breath work, doing something for 150 minutes a week, it would be really easy to overdo HIIT workouts. So if you are going to a 45-minute HIIT workout, that can be overdone.
Yeah, just like it's easy to overdo sweets. It's pretty hard to kill yourself with broccoli.
Yes.
It's easy to be latched on to lust and some type of sensation and relationship that you're constantly searching for. It's hard to have a really shitty relationship if you over communicate with each other.
Totally.
Yeah.
So some of the things that you and I talked about with fitness culture.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go there?
Sure.
As far as like hot takes on fitness culture.
Oh, yeah.
So we live in a busyness culture, in a hustle culture, in this grinding culture that
it's applauded.
there is this.
How many parents you hear love to brag about how, I'm so busy.
And it's so funny. I told someone yesterday, when they said, I have these things to do, and I said, you know what's funny is I'm actually in the stage of cutting a lot of things out because it's not serving me. So that's, I will listen and I will love you.
Do they
fully.
just look at you like,
what are you cutting out?
You just spoke Spanish to them?
Yes.
Like, what?
But what do you cut out? So there's this mentality that's very pervasive, especially in fitness culture, of more. And we talked about this earlier with the more sweat, more calories burned, more fatigue, etc. And I think part of that is because workouts are really easy to sell. Mm-hmm. A workout class is really easy to sell. Do this workout for the next 90 days and experience results versus, hey, for the next 90 days, be aware of your proteins, carbs, and fats, and maybe whole foods, removing some of the processed foods, and see if you feel better. Or for the next 90 days, make it about your sleep and your relationships. If you're thinking about that relational piece, what am I doing throughout the day that's keeping me going? Maybe for the next 90 days, you work on retraining your brain about what a workout needs to be. And then let's talk.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff we do here, but that's not.
I'm smiling and laughing because it's like the worst sale of all time. Like, hey,
if
so
I
here's the
sat
program.
and told you to do that, you'd be like, but what else?
Here's a program. 80% of your workouts, they're not going to make you feel like you did something significant. I want you to have deep, hard conversations with those that you love. I want you to eat in a way that's boring about 80% of the time, and I want you to sleep 8+ hours.
Okay.
Sign
the most, me up.
It's
How
the
much?
Yeah. But it's no less true, and I think that's why it's a hard sell, and I think that's why group fitness, regardless of the modality, is such a easy and great place for people to start because you're doing something, and it psychologically it does feel like you have some momentum, and it's like, man, I finished this thing. It was experientially hard. Good for me. Like, look what I did.
We applaud the group fitness side too, because it gets people accountable, in a rhythm, moving. Maybe they weren't moving. It has someone helping them through kind of those uncomfortable steps as they get started. So the fitness side is great. I think if I'm circling back to my original story, guess what? Here I am, October 2023, a year and a half after all of those things started, and I don't have those problems anymore.
Wow.
And that wasn't because of celery juice, and it wasn't because I went to spin class more.
Right.
So yes, the fitness side can be fixed too. So God,
such a great point.
There's this guilt surrounding if you don't do those workouts that are going to devastate you, that wasn't effective enough. And I think as we head into this season of holiday, it just hurts my soul when an instructor says, burn off the turkey or burn off last night. And I'm like, that's actually not the way that the body works, because if you're burning more calories, your body is going to hit a point of calories that they burn. And then that means that you're actually taking energy from your other systems if you're overworking yourself. So you're taking away from your endocrine system, you're taking away from your digestion system, you're probably feeling mental fog. But okay, we will burn more and do the 90-minute turkey burn. No, that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
It actually might be great during this season of eating more or having that relational, wonderful time with your family to have that special pumpkin pie, that if you're in that calorie surplus, that's a wonderful time to lift weights. That's a wonderful time to focus more on your resistance training. And guess what? If you have been consistent on your discipline, your commitments to yourself, and your routine for the past year, this season might not shock your system too much because you'll know how to navigate it. So I say all that because during this time, people will increase their cardio workouts. So one of my hot takes on the fitness industry would be the longer cardio workout that's performed at the moderate intensity is probably not going to give you the results that you want. Now, we mentioned the low to moderate intensity being great, that zone 2, or if you sprinkle this kind of stuff in sometimes. I'm talking about the
zone 3, zone 4.
Yes, and the 3 to 4 times per week spin class, or the 3 to 4. I used to teach spin, love spin, super fun. Doesn't mean you need to do it 4 times a week or that type of workout 4 times a week. Because what happens is when you're working at that moderate intensity, is that you're pulling more from your stress hormones, which is causing your cortisol to spike. You're working in that sympathetic system for a lot longer time. Your body may think that you're hungrier because it goes into that fight or flight. You're looking at your watch thinking, I burned this many calories, but we'll get into that in a second, and thinking that ergo you get to eat more and you're hungrier, so it all makes sense. And for women who are in those overstressed, busy, this is a stressful season in particular, but just in general, already in that state, when you're constantly doing that, you could be causing yourself to be more inflamed and lead to chronic inflammation. Now, inflammation is okay. Inflammation is great because it signals to your muscle, hey, we need to repair something here. If you're chronically inflamed, then you may be having more anxiety, more joint pain, less ability to connect to your muscle. So if you're out there working out and you're like, I'm just not feeling it, it's just not like working today, that's actually completely correct with the way that like neuromuscularly and the proprioception of feeling the work might be harder. It might be that you're just burning out quicker than you typically would. All of those big signs of chronic inflammation. And inflammation, an inflamed muscle, takes 48 hours to repair. So for women, a lot of times, and men even too, they sprinkle different workouts in. You might have a membership at a bunch of different places, but think about it this way. If you just burned out these muscles and then you're going to a different program the next day, or reworking those same muscles because you think you need more work there. Like, I want biceps. I want so many biceps. You're actually restarting that inflammation process when it wasn't finished. And so you're probably not recovering at all and causing the chronic inflammation to happen. Stress. And that can cause all of these problems to just be worse. But that can be part of the trouble too with the way that we think the fitness world should be, of this randomization, that I want changes. I want to do lots of different things. I'm going to bounce around here. I'm going to go play tennis, and then I'm going to do this. And right, but if you're not following this program, you're probably just banging on those same muscles over and over.
It's inevitable. It's inevitable that something's not going to match up great when you're doing this juggling act of, 5 different things.
That's why you need a guide. That's why you need a program. That's why we do it by quarter. But it's also, fitness instructors don't plan typically their workouts with each other if it's at a studio that doesn't have a program. What I mean by this, I worked at a studio where we went through a training. That next week, you better believe we all wanted to use those moves because we were like, I love the kettlebell swing. I'm going to do the kettlebell swing. I love the burpee because then people hate me. Definitely going to do both of those. That whole week, everybody was doing burpees and kettlebell swings.
Yeah.
And there were people who were coming every day. So that chronic inflammation process can be really devastating for your thyroid, or it can make it so that your testosterone actually isn't activating. And if it's not activating, then that means that that muscle growth isn't even happening. So all of your work that you put in was for nothing. So that's kind of my thought on the long cardio piece, and then that dives into some of the randomness. But I also think if our main goal during this as women, as men, should be for that muscle growth, that mechanical load, not the sweatiness. So the time that I spend straining that muscle, less of all of these compound movements, move, pulse, pulse, pulse type workouts, but working on specific muscle groups. As we age, our type 2 muscle fibers start to decrease. And men typically have a higher compilation of those muscle fibers anyway, which a funny thing about that is that women typically have more type 1, meaning they can handle more of that endurance stuff or those higher rep counts. Meaning when we're going to I'll say it, a Pilates class.
Just say it, yeah.
And we're doing a move that is burning, right? Like pulse, pulse, hold, da, 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 da. That feels like we worked more because it's more genetically natural, because we have more of those
for the female
muscle fibers. Yeah, that versus a male. And you've gone to one of those classes with me before.
Yeah, devastating.
That a male would find that a lot more devastating because that's not the more muscle fibers that they have. They have more.
That's a great point, E. That for a female, you're going to naturally gravitate towards things that are muscular endurance, things that highlight that type of muscle fiber. So it's not completely psychological or biological that these things are populated with women. It's because you're going to be better at it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is if those are the only types of workouts that we're doing, so the endurance workouts are the workouts that are burning, that's actually not going to move the needle on building what we need to build for an anti-aging standpoint, for a results standpoint, for a metabolism to remain strong standpoint. So that would be something to women that I'd say, hey, 10 years ago, I wish that someone had told me it doesn't need to be these long cardio workouts. It doesn't need to be that it's burn, burn, burn. It actually needs to be that I'm focusing on certain muscle groups smartly in order to get the results that I want.
So how have you, and I ask you this because maybe it would be really encouraging for a female that's listening to this. We talked about the brain being plastic. It's not easy to change something that we once thought was true. But what goes through your head when we prioritize a hypertrophic resistance training session, which means the rep range isn't 30 plus, where it gets into the endurance aspect of the muscle fiber? What's going through your head where you remind yourself like, hey, this is good. Hey, this is what I want. No, I'm not going to get bulky by doing this. You know, stuff like that. That's very common.
It's very hard to get bulky.
Yeah.
But people
been
are
trying to do it for
about
years.
That. Yeah, it's not working. So that's very hard. But I even while I'm sitting here saying to you, like muscle growth, muscle fibers, mechanical load, focus, like that could scare a lot of women when, hey, it's very hard to get bulky. I'm talking about this in the way that by focusing on these muscle groups, that is actually going to not pull too much from those stress hormones and increase the cortisol. It's going to activate the testosterone in the right kind of way. You're actually going to get the results that you want from this versus that randomized program that was all about your sweat. So as far as like working out for myself, when I come to work out, I now love those like what we would call bodybuilding sessions. I think though you feel great when you leave and it's not devastating. But as far as with women, I try and with men, to be honest, I try to tell them a lot of like why we're doing that or why it's healthy for them or why it's not. I don't necessarily say like because of this nervous system state or whatever it may be, but I try to help them understand so that we can retrain the brain, so that we don't think about it in the old way.
And I think there is a quality priority in what you're talking about. And here's a fun fact. I don't know if you've ever seen this documentary. It's called Pumping Iron. Do you know of this?
Mm-mm.
You guys know Pumping Iron. Most guys know it because it's focused mainly on male bodybuilding. It's what put Arnold Schwarzenegger on the map. It's a very popular movie amongst males. But I saw some behind the scenes.
That and Braveheart. No, I'm just
yes.
kidding.
I saw some
Godfather.
behind the scenes footage, and this is going to sound like underwhelming maybe to someone, but to me it blew my mind because we're so obsessed with reps. But for those guys that were training for the quality and the mechanical load of certain movement patterns, they wouldn't care what the reps were. They were just going for the quality of the position. They would start some and be like, that's not right. And they'd start all over. And behind the scenes you're watching, and it's like, well, they're not even counting. They're not even counting. They're just going for like the essence of what it is they want to do. And even though bodybuilding has a certain, indulgent quality to it, or, it's a little vain or focused more on the aesthetics, that little salient piece of information I thought is very relevant to what we're talking about, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm just doing this not for the accolades, not to hit a certain rep. It's just the quality of it. And to have a session where you go in and be like, none of that even matters is actually liberating, especially in this culture
so
where it's
hard.
like, hey, 60-minute classes, you got to do this, it's performance, 3, 2, 1, go, it's time, all that stuff. It's like, hey, I'm just trying to get a pump.
Yeah, it's so liberating because I almost think I get this like PTSD when the clock goes 3, 2, 1. When it clicks, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But I think that it makes me think with, I think it makes me think with your conversation with Brian that if we, and it's funny because I think in my phone he's Brian Movement or something like that. But your conversation with him about intentionality and focusing mindset on the reps. Of if I'm focusing on this one rep being really full of quality, that changes everything.
Yeah.
It changes the way that you feel during the workout. It changes the way that your brain is attaching to that muscle. Remember, if you're chronically inflamed and you're not able to do that, that's a sign right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I try very much to focus. And someone said to me recently, but there's so much to think about. I'm like, so there is, but just thinking about that movement, looking as good as you can make it, and we'll fine tune it as we go.
And such is life, right? There's a lot to think about being a parent, but it's like, hey, in the moment, like you can only focus on one or two things,
And that's okay.
and when you put it in that context, and then you add a clock to it, it just sounds so stupid. And you realize, like, man, the clock was this packaged thing that we were told was going to make us fitter, but it's really just a logistical component of running a group fitness class, right? Like competition with somebody else does not get you more fit. It doesn't. It's a nice correlate for intensity, but if we're saying there's a session that isn't based on volume per se or moving as fast as you possibly can, it's totally obsolete. And I think that's something that we've just put on this pedestal, like, well, of course you click the clock for this. And it's like, what are you talking about?
I even think with lifting sessions when it says every 3 minutes times 4 sets or whatever it may be, I actually now like to give the option of if you feel pretty good or you don't feel pretty good, let's change that timing to be what we need it to be. And I think old me would have been like, logistically, this is going to be most beautiful if everybody is squatting at the exact same time.
And down.
And
up.
And now it's like, I want you to go when the quality is there. and you will know what that means. And I think sometimes in a class, old school people will be like, when am I supposed to go? Like, no, just go when you know that you can do it.
Yeah. And I think
I'm going to give you time.
Totally. And this is a great segue to the next topic is, psychologically from a operational standpoint of your brain, there's what's called a top-down approach, where you have something outside of you that tells you what you should be doing. And then there's a bottom-up approach, which is what we're talking about. It's like, hey, you have to pay attention. You have to be in tune with what's happening, how you're feeling, and let that, that's exactly the rule of thumb you use when you wake up in the morning, right? Sure, there's a number of hours that I slept, but you're basing your decision to go to the gym on how you feel. It's an intuition, which is a very biological and real thing. These fitness trackers we have, it's a top-down mechanism. I can wake up, put my feet on the ground, go outside, get eyes on the sun, and then make that decision for myself. Or while I'm still in bed, I can look at my watch that says you're under recovered, right? Yeah. Which one's more accurate?
Yes, and I think that it goes back to what we said at the beginning of knowing yourself. You have to know how you feel. The fitness tracker, and we are both wearing Garmin's, people.
Yeah, this podcast brought to you by Garmin.
Yes, but here's why. Number one, to tell the time. Number two, I like to just kind of know an idea of my stats. Does that determine how I run my day?
It's a great point.
No.
I'll take it under advisement.
Right. Or I'm like, oh, that's super cool. But you and I have talked about this before, that some of the best weightlifting workouts that I have had, and then it's like, you've burned 37 calories. Yeah. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. You're just warming up. It's like, no, I'm not.
No, I'm not. And so I think heart rate is a great thing to use this for, is to see, even this morning when I told you I was kind of elevated, that I'm like, where is my heart rate right now? I think that that's a great piece, but fitness trackers don't track your muscle strain. They are,
no matter what Whoop says, it doesn't.
Are tracking that heart rate and what's happening cardiovascularly. And I think that what's interesting too is your body will adapt to the workouts that it's doing the most often. So it's that newbie gains thing, that like right when you start working out, or right when you start running, or right when you start the program, you look at your calorie count and you're like, I'm incredible. And then as you continue on, it might be less, which is why I have a really hard time when people will say to me, still to this day, if someone's like, I burned 700 calories doing that workout. And I'm like, oh, that could mean a lot of things. Because mine says 200, and
it's not accurate. Sorry.
Right. So here's the thing is, since your body adapts, but your watch might not know that, it's going to give you a really inaccurate version of what your calorie count is. The muscle strain piece being, if you're weightlifting and your heart rate is pretty level and you're not devastated on the floor, it's not going to calculate that calorie count correctly. But it's also it may overestimate or underestimate. And a lot of that has to do with like how often you're doing the workout or how much your heart rate is changing. And what that can lead to is that you overestimate your calories that you get to. For people who say calories in, calories out, you're taking in more than you actually could.
Yeah.
But I think there's also that development of this more is better culture, that your watch will ping you to move, or you will think, I haven't gotten my steps, or I can't do something because of my watch, this should just be like a fun tool for you to look at sometimes, not to analyze or completely go off of.
Yeah. Or another mechanism to make you feel worse about yourself.
About yourself. Yeah. I am not. And it can give you some good cues of sleep and
it's a great teaching tool. That's what I like to say. It's like, man, what a wonderful thing to introduce HRV. What a wonderful thing to make you tuned into the effects of alcohol on your recovery. what a wonderful thing, like you said, to take under advisement. Like, oh, it's a 5,000 calorie day. Okay, I should probably make sure I
No
get some
wonder
good
I'm
sleep.
tired. Maybe I need some food, a little bit more food today.
But when it becomes, when you become a servant to it, when it becomes a competitive game that makes you more like a robot and less like a human, it's like, hey, we have a problem. And this thing was just invented to clue you into physical and psychological sensations that you already possess. And that's absolutely true, right? These things that we use the watch for, my body can do all of that. I've grown numb to it, right? So I think it has a great place in time, but my wife in her infinite wisdom, I got her a Garmin and I was like, hey, it does all this stuff. And she's like, hang on, I don't care. I'm like, but you can play games with yourself. And it's like, I don't, and she knew herself well enough to be like,
so much.
to be like, hey, I don't need another thing, because she's a competitive person. It's like, I don't need another thing for me to be competitive with. And I was like, hey, roger that.
Great point, because that was another thing that I worked on, like during my adrenal mess, was that self-talk and that what I was surrounding myself with. And that's me minimizing things that cause me anxiety. My biggest anxiety is time anxiety. So if I'm late to something, I just want to make sure that time is on my side. And I think that might be a great example of, hey, me looking at this is giving me that anxiety feeling of like not being enough or not doing enough, or if I'm hoping for a certain thing, that's not actually elevating me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes into what we said in the first podcast, which I flubbed up the equation, so help me here, but it was about expectation.
Yeah.
And it's experience minus expectation equals happiness. And I think I said it the opposite.
But I feel like everybody
doesn't
knew
matter.
what you meant.
Everybody's like, I'll fix that equation for her. Math's not my strong suit. And that's my husband's strong suit. Yet I work in a place that has a lot of numbers, which I'm like calculating. You guys have 3 minutes left. But if my expectation is really, really high and my experience is not that, then my happiness level is going to be affected. But if my expectation is level, I'm probably always going to have a good number there as far as how I feel. So I feel that with fitness trackers, that it's like if I put this big expectation that this workout says it's going to burn all these calories and it didn't, then I'm in a spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what we want anyone to be in.
And you said it earlier. It's like setting expectations is relative to the set of circumstances that you have, the life stage that you're in, the residual stress that you've already experienced. Expectations are contextual. This is not contextual. It does not care about any of that stuff. It's just a data point. And so when you use that out of context, it pulls you out of your own circumstance and tells you something that's not true, because it's not in support of what your life is really looking like. And so I think that's why we can sum this up in a sec, because I don't think this is vague. I think it's very clear what we're talking about. But one of the things is, on a daily basis, assessing what you should expect of yourself for that day and setting like realistic expectations, because the way that quote can get taken out of context is to say, well, I just, I don't ever have any expectations for myself. And that's not true. I don't think that's what we as humans struggle with. It's not having no expectations. It's just not appreciating like everything that goes into your performance. And so it's just with clear, more of a landscape view with your eyes, like seeing all the things that you have to consider to evaluate what the expectation should be. And yeah, talking about 10 years ago, that's something I wish, man, I had a lot of stress, a lot of self-hate because of that right there. Having expectations that I didn't meet and just being like, who are you? What are you? Right? When it's like, hey, it's not realistic,
Mm-hmm. And in the fitness world, if we're circling back and, putting a bow on it, that a lot of us place a lot of expectation on what fitness should be, or how perfect we need to be at it, or how we need to look doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually not that sustenance idea of, I'm doing this to move my body. I deserve it. It feels good. And that's enough.
Yeah. Well, I think we could circle back to these things that we talked about. And number one would be, hey, you're lovable just because you're alive, not because you look a certain way, not because you move a certain way. Like, your life has worth, and you deserve to do things that are loving to yourself. And that's the reason that you do these things, like eat vegetables and work out in a way that don't necessarily feel like it's a celebration. But you have to, one, believe that about yourself. Two, think really hard about these things that you're doing and the reasons why that you're doing them. And without that, man, that can go a lot of different ways, right? You can be swept up in some fitness movement. You can be swept up in validation for how hard you worked out, or the outfit that you have on, or all of this stuff. So I think without those two things, like, you're floating in this sea without any compass or rudder. I think, like you said, and maybe this is just the stage that we're in as parents, but I think, like, making a lot of decisions beforehand is crucial. Not having to worry about, like, how are we going to put dinner together? Hey, it's these things. It's a spice. It's kind of boring. And it's the same thing for exercise. Hey, non-negotiable, I get this sleep. When I wake up, I'm going to evaluate how I feel, and then that's going to set the stage of what I'm about to do. But that structure, that template stays the same. I don't have to arrive at the morning wondering, like, oh, am I going to get up? I'm not, it's like, and I think everybody can relate to that. And then, I think, like, the workout is not always for performance. And that's based on what you need for that day, right? There's some days where it absolutely is. And I'm a big fan of that as well. It's
Me
like,
too.
I want, it's like,
Me
hey,
too.
yesterday I painted myself in a box where it's like, you set the pace on the
That was
ski.
me the other day. I was
Yeah.
like, I want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you have to earn that. The same way that you earn a day to have a Queen Amon or a
Yes.
chocolate croissant.
Right.
And that's the balance. The majority is not very sexy. The majority is not
the sellable stuff.
It's not the sellable, but that's palatable and it's acceptable because you appreciate why it is that you're doing that. And it doesn't feel like a ripoff. It feels like something you're doing because you love it. Did we get all that?
I love it.
Thank you.
Hey, if you guys are interested, I handle the inquiries for the gym. So you just fill out the form on our website and we can talk. And we can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
After the last podcast, you had a couple of people that were like,
Yes. I had people call and they were like, I just listened to you. And okay.
what an honor to speak
That's
to you.
awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad it impacted you. So hopefully that happens again. But
Thank you very much. This
thank
was
you.
awesome.
That was fun.